I didn't even need to speak. The second I stepped into that hotel ballroom, navy silk, hugging my waist, gold-stitched sleeves catching the chandelier light, the room went quiet. Their mouths opened, but their words dried up. For once, it wasn't because I'd said something wrong. It was because I didn't look like the same woman they'd spent years laughing at behind my back. They didn't recognize the dress. Or maybe they did. They just couldn't believe I was the one wearing it. It wasn't the label that stunned them. It was the man standing beside me, the man who designed it. And the fact that he used to be my sister-in-law's husband. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the sequins, before the headlines, before the designer ever touched my skin. Back to when I was just the joke at family dinners. It started small. Snide comments when I wore secondhand shoes to dinner at Diane's place. Polite smiles when I arrived in linen slacks from the discount bin while they shimmered in designer lace and clutched handbags worth more than my monthly rent. "You're so brave dressing for comfort," my mother-in-law Marcia would say, her wine breath sour with condescension. Brave, as if I just survived a tornado. The truth was, I dressed for affordability. I was the one who clipped coupons while my husband Darren accidentally bought $80 steak cuts he claimed were on sale. The one who managed our bills while his family whispered about how frumpy I looked, as if thrift was contagious. They never said it directly, that was their specialty. Thinly veiled cruelty wrapped in compliments. The kind that smiled as it sliced. The worst was Charlotte, my sister-in-law. Always in Valentino, always smirking. "You just have such a grounded sense of style," she once told me, eyeing my department store dress like it offended her corneas. "It's very honest." Honest, like an admission of failure. Darren never defended me. Just laughed along, poured another glass of wine, and said, "She doesn't care about that stuff." He never noticed the way I folded my napkin tighter when they spoke, how I skipped dessert just to have an excuse to leave early. He didn't notice a lot of things, especially what was going on between Charlotte and him when I wasn't looking. But I didn't know that yet. At that time, all I knew was that in every room filled with glossed lips and glinting heels, I was the invisible one. Or worse, the one they noticed only to mock. Until the day I met Marcello. But let's not rush. The night that changed everything started like all the others at a family dinner I didn't want to attend. In a room full of people who shared blood but none of my truth. I wore my usual navy dress, the one with the slightly pilled fabric but flattering neckline, and brought my homemade salad. Charlotte arrived 30 minutes late in a red sheath dress and heels that practically screamed Cannes Film Festival. I almost forgot she chirped, eyes gleaming with mischief. I bumped into Marcello earlier today. He's finally back in town. New line dropping next month. It's going to be everywhere. The women gasped. Marcia placed a hand over her heart. "Oh my God, Charlotte, you were always his favorite muse." Charlotte laughed and flipped her blonde hair over one shoulder. I had no idea who Marcello was. But I would. Soon. Too soon, perhaps. Anyway, Charlotte continued sipping her Chardonnay. He always said I had a face made for fabric. I nearly choked on my forkful of salad. The way she said it, like she'd been his lover, his confidant maybe more. She always spoke about men that way, like they all belonged to her eventually. Even the ones who didn't. Even the ones who were married. Even Darren. That night when we got home, I asked Darren about Marcello. Just a casual mention. His jaw clenched just barely. Yeah, they used to date. Messy. I waited for more. None came. That's when the silence started growing roots in our marriage. And that's when I started noticing things: late-night texts, bathroom locks, shirts that smelled like someone else's perfume. But what I didn't expect was that Marcello, the man they all worshipped, would become the one who saw me. Really saw me. And that the first time we met, it would be because Charlotte was trying to humiliate me. Again. But instead of tearing me down, she handed me the sharpest weapon I'd ever wield. And she didn't even know it. Not yet. Marcello wasn't what I expected. He wasn't tall or dark or brooding like in Charlotte's stories. He didn't glide into the room with a cape of pretension or leave behind a trail of designer cologne. He walked in through the back entrance of the gallery quietly with rolled-up sleeves and a pencil behind his ear. A bolt of fabric was slung over his shoulder like a weapon, his hands dusted in chalk, not ego. And he saw me before I saw him. Literally. I was standing near the hors d'oeuvres table at the charity fashion event Charlotte had invited me to, as a joke, no doubt. She told me there would be small brands, nothing couture, and that maybe I could find something more achievable. I came in a dress I'd made myself. Navy blue again, my color of safety. Charlotte looked me up and down and smirked. Then Marcello appeared behind me. "That hemline is wrong," he said. I turned ready to apologize or hide. But he smiled. "Wrong for anyone else, but not for you. I froze. It wasn't a flirt. It was an assessment. A designer's eye. You made this? He said, more statement than question. I nodded. He tilted his head and circled me once, fingers grazing his chin. Tell me what made you choose this pleating at the shoulder. I blinked. No one had ever asked me that, not even my husband. Because it hides the part I hate. Marcello nodded, serious. Yes, and yet it draws the eye in all the right ways. Very clever. Very honest. I flinched. That word again. But from his mouth it felt like praise, not a slap. I'm Marcello, he said, extending a chalk-stained hand. I know, I whispered. He chuckled. Of course you do. Everyone here pretends not to. Except you. And in that moment something shifted. He looked at me the way no one in that family ever had, like I was more than a +1, more than a housewife, more than Charlotte's brother's afterthought. And Charlotte, she was watching us from across the room drink, frozen in hand, a half-laugh lodged in her throat. For the first time she didn't look amused. That night I stayed long after Charlotte left. Marcello and I sat on the edge of the gallery's makeshift backstage, sipping leftover champagne and talking about fabric, about femininity, about feeling invisible in rooms that demand you sparkle. I design for women who've been overlooked, he said. Not just seen, but dismissed. You'd be surprised how many powerful women feel like that. I wasn't surprised at all. And when he asked if I wanted to visit his studio sometime, I didn't hesitate. Not because I wanted to seduce him, not yet, but because I wanted no needed to be seen. Darren didn't ask where I'd been. He never did. I could have walked in smelling like Marcello's cologne, and he wouldn't have noticed he was too busy watching TV, texting, whispering in the bathroom. I started going to the studio twice a week. Marcello taught me how to drape, how to let fabric move with the body instead of hiding it. He gave me bolts of silk, scraps of lace, endless patience. We never crossed a line, not then. But the room always felt charged, like we were tiptoeing near an open flame, waiting for someone to breathe too hard. One afternoon, I tried on a piece we'd built together, gold satin with a low back and delicate buttons down the spine. I stood in front of the mirror, breathless. You look like you belong in a painting, Marcello said, voice soft. I turned. Even if I'm married to someone who doesn't notice when I wear paint, his gaze didn't move from mine. That man is blind, he said. I wanted to tell him everything. About Darren. About Charlotte. About the affair I hadn't proven but knew in my gut like a second heartbeat. Instead, I said, you knew her well, didn't you? His mouth twitched. Charlotte? I nodded. He exhaled slowly. Too well. She wore beauty like armor, but it never went beneath the surface. She hated being known. And me? He walked closer. You want to be known so badly it hurts. The silence after that said more than words could. Later that week, Charlotte invited me to another family dinner, another curated display of her perfect life, perfect outfits, perfect man. But that night, Darren pulled me aside in the kitchen. He reeked of whiskey and guilt. You've been spending a lot of time sewing, he said, voice too calm. It's called creating, I snapped. His eyes narrowed. Does Marcello know you're married? That was the moment I knew. He hadn't just guessed. He was worried. He had no idea what I was doing with Marcello, but he was terrified I was doing exactly what he had done with Charlotte. And in that fear, I found power. I smiled. He knows I'm married, I said. Do you? He didn't reply, because we both knew he'd checked out long ago. And in that silence, I decided I would wear Marcello's next piece to the family's summer gala, Charlotte's favorite event, the one where she always wore white. And I would walk in beside the man she thought would never design for anyone else. And when I did, it wouldn't just be the hemline that turned heads. It would be me. The dress was unlike anything I had ever worn. Not just in fabric, though. Marcello's choice was otherworldly sheer organza, layered over silk, hand-sewn crystals that shimmered only when the light hit just right. It was how it felt, like it wasn't sewn for a mannequin, like it was made to carry a woman's vengeance with grace. This is too much, I whispered as Marcello adjusted the neckline in the mirror. I shouldn't wear this. You should have worn this 10 years ago, he said softly. I looked at myself, the woman who used to hide in navy, now daring to glimmer. Not just for attention, but for rebirth. Still there was a line. I hadn't crossed it. Not yet. The gala was at the Langston Estate, Charlotte's in-laws' property, all marble and ivy and champagne trays floating through manicured gardens. The kind of party where people judged you silently but harshly. Darren had already RSVP'd for us weeks ago, probably assuming I'd stay home with a headache like usual. But this time I replied directly to Charlotte's assistant. +1. When Marcello pulled up in a sleek charcoal car, my heart did a small somersault. He stepped out with that signature nonchalance open shirt collar Italian loafers, and the same look in his eyes he'd given me the day I wore that first hand-sewn dress. "Ready to ruin their night?" he asked. I smirked. "Born ready." We didn't enter through the front. We glided through the terrace hand in hand like smoke curling in from the night. People turned. Glasses clinked. A hushed gasp followed. And then Charlotte spotted us. Her mouth opened. Her jaw clenched. Her hand tightened on her husband's arm, though her eyes locked on Marcello. The entire garden shifted in energy, like everyone suddenly remembered the rumors, the breakup, the tabloid whispers that Marcello's muse had broken more than his heart. And now here he was. With me, I stood tall in her favorite designer's creation, in her ex-lover's eyes, in her unspoken rage. Darren found me near the bar. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, grabbing my elbow. I didn't flinch, my +1. "You can't be serious. You weren't when you slept with your sister-in-law either." His face drained of color. I had never said it aloud before, had never even let the words form in my own mouth. But now the truth felt like silk on my skin. How long, I asked him. 6 months? A year? Or did it start before our 3rd anniversary when you said Charlotte and I should spend more time together because we were so alike? He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned away. He didn't deny it. Later, under the hanging lanterns, Marcello and I found a quiet corner near the stone fountain. "You didn't have to come," I told him. "They're cruel, and you've already been wounded by them once." He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. "And yet here I am. You were worth coming back for." The way he said it, no seduction, no pressure, just certainty. And when he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Not this time. The warmth in his palm spread like light. And when he leaned in, lips brushing mine, I let it happen. It wasn't a kiss of lust. It was recognition. Of 2 people who'd been discarded by the same family, who knew what it meant to be used, then forgotten. But we remembered each other, even if that memory came with consequences. That night, back in his car, I stared out the window as the city blurred by. I wasn't thinking of guilt. I wasn't even thinking of Darren. I was thinking of how good it felt to finally be the one who left people speechless, to be the one they watched instead of mocked, to be more than a quiet placeholder in their loud, shallow lives. But the thing about crossing a line is, you don't always realize you're doing it until you're already standing on the other side. And behind you is everything you used to be. The morning after the gala, the light hit differently. I sat on the edge of Marcello's bed, still in the silk slip he'd draped over my shoulders when we got back to his loft. He had made coffee, of course he had. He was the kind of man who made espresso without asking how you took it, and somehow always got it right. But I couldn't touch it, because everything tasted like guilt. I stared out the wide windows overlooking the city skyline, my reflection ghosted in the glass. And for the first time since that awful dinner years ago, the one where Charlotte had accidentally spilled red wine on my only white dress, I felt powerful and sick. I hadn't slept with Marcello, not in the way most people meant it, but the line had been crossed long before last night, in the way he looked at me, in the way I leaned into his hand, in the way I let myself be adored. I betrayed Darren emotionally long before Darren ever knew what room I was leaving to go see Marcello. But then again, hadn't Darren betrayed me physically, spiritually, repeatedly for years without remorse? Still, that didn't make it clean. There's no redemption in symmetry. When I came home, Darren was sitting in the kitchen, hunched over toast he didn't touch. "Did you sleep with him?" he asked without looking up. "No," I said, and it was true, technically. "But you wanted to." I didn't answer. That was worse than yes. We spent the next week as roommates, silent ones. I cooked my own meals, washed my own laundry, slept with the door locked. And during that time, I replayed everything Marcello had ever said to me. But I also replayed something Darren said once years ago that I'd buried too deep to feel until now. It was at another dinner, Charlotte's birthday. I'd worn a pale peach blouse, one that took me 2 hours to iron, only for Darren to lean over and whisper, "You try too hard." That night, I cried in the bathroom. I realize now, it wasn't the trying that hurt. It was the way he hated that I still wanted to be seen. Like wanting to matter was desperate. Like dignity was only for people like Charlotte. I called Marcello a few days later, not to meet, just to hear his voice. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I don't know who I am," I whispered. "You're the woman I designed that dress for," he said. "The one who walked into a den of wolves and didn't flinch. You think that's who I am? I know it is. And somehow that made it worse. 'Cause I wanted to be that woman, I really did. But all I could feel was the weight of 1,000 doubts pressing into my chest. That weekend, the fallout began. Charlotte posted a carefully cropped photo from the gala with only half my face visible in the background, just enough for people to ask. Is that her OMG? Is that Marcello with her? She looks different. Since when did she dress like that? The comments piled in. Not on my page, I had none. But they circulated like poison through the family grapevine. Then came the calls. Marcia, who hadn't spoken to me in weeks, suddenly texted, "Is there something you'd like to tell the family before we all start assuming?" To which I replied, "You've been assuming about me for years. Why stop now?" I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, not from fear, but from something else. Resolve? And yet amidst it all, there was one moment I didn't expect. Darren in the hallway, voice quiet. "Did you ever love me?" I turned. He looked small, fragile. The man who used to tower over me with certainty now shrank under a question he should have asked a decade ago. "I did," I said honestly. "But you didn't love me. You loved who I made your life look like." "That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's true." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, because deep down he knew the most unforgivable part. Not that I had found someone else, but that I had stopped asking to be loved by him, that I no longer needed his validation or his name. Later that night, I sat in my old sewing room running my fingers across scraps of cloth I'd once stitched into clothes no one noticed. And I realized I didn't feel guilty for kissing Marcello. I felt guilty for feeling alive again. And maybe that's what betrayal really is. Not the act, but the moment you stop mourning someone else's version of you and start resurrecting your own. I wasn't looking for secrets, but secrets, it turns out, don't like to stay buried, especially not in a family like Darren's where appearances were ironed smoother than any truth ever could be. It started with a knock on the door. A package, no return label. Inside, a white envelope, thick and slightly stained. And a dress sketch. Not just any sketch, one of Marcello's originals. I would have recognized that signature curve anywhere. But the model it was drawn on, the hairstyle, the features, the pose, it was me. But the date scribbled in pencil at the corner. 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Marcello hadn't even spoken to me. 2 years ago, I was still the invisible one in off-brand cardigans, still playing hostess to Charlotte's smug little smirks, still pretending my marriage had a pulse. So how? I flipped the envelope over and found a note written in the kind of loopy feminine script that practically whispered guilt. "He's not who you think he is. He's just better at making you feel like you matter. See, Charlotte." I drove to Marcello's studio that night. I didn't call. The hallway outside his door smelled like jasmine and paint thinner. He opened the door with that easy half smile he always wore when he thought I came just to be seen. But tonight, I needed to be told the truth. I held out the sketch. "You drew this," I said. He glanced at it, didn't deny it. "I did. 2 years ago." A pause. Then yes. I blinked. "Why?" He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Because I saw you. You didn't even know me." "I saw you," he repeated. "At one of Charlotte's gallery dinners. You were wearing this blue thing with mismatched buttons and a stubborn hem. You were holding a tray of drinks for people who didn't thank you." He stepped closer. "You looked tired, but you still smiled. You still tried to be enough." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "You sketched me because I looked pathetic." "No," he said, voice low. "Because I knew what it was like to be dismissed by a room full of people who thought they were better than you." He didn't lie, not exactly. But he didn't tell me everything either. Because that night when I finally confronted Charlotte at Marcia's birthday dinner, the one where she insisted we act like grown-ups, she laughed. A cold, cracked laugh that didn't even try to sound kind. "You think you're the first woman Marcello saved with a sewing machine," she spat, swirling her wine. "He did the same to me, darling. When we met, I was the broken thing he stitched back together, until I didn't fit his design anymore." I stood there holding my breath, waiting. And then she leaned in, lips nearly brushing my ear. "He doesn't fall in love with women, he falls in love with projects. You just happen to be the next one." I didn't know what to believe. Maybe she was lying. Or maybe she was telling the truth in the only language she knew, cruelty. But the real betrayal, it wasn't between me and Marcello. It was the realization that no one in this family had ever really seen me as whole, only as broken in different ways. Darren saw me as the convenience. Charlotte saw me as the competition. Marcello saw me as the canvas. And for a moment I wanted to disappear again, to crawl back into my navy blue cocoon and sew the walls up tight. But I didn't. Because somewhere in the mess of it all, something had changed. Not just the way they looked at me, but the way I looked at myself. A week later, I returned the dress to Marcello's studio. "I don't want to be your muse," I told him. "I don't want to be stitched into someone else's story." He looked hurt, but he nodded. "I want to make my own." And with that, I walked away. Not back to Darren. Not back to Charlotte's circus of crocodile smiles. I walked into my own studio, the dusty attic room I'd ignored for years, and laid out the fabrics I used to hide behind. And for the first time, I began designing something for me. Not for approval, not for revenge. For rebirth. But just when I thought I had severed myself from them, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end wasn't Marcello, it wasn't Darren, it was Marcia, panicked, breathing fast. And she said 5 words I'll never forget. Charlotte is in the hospital. The hospital smelled like bleach and whispered panic. I hadn't been in that building since Darren's father died 5 years earlier, back when the family still acted like I was one of them. Back when Charlotte used to sit beside me in waiting rooms and sigh dramatically, like she was always too elegant to be anywhere unpleasant. But now Charlotte was the one behind the glass, pale, hooked up to machines, her blonde hair clinging to her temples in damp curls. No designer dress, no lipstick, just a faded hospital gown and swollen silence. And I stood there outside the ICU, wondering why the hell I'd come. Marcia had begged. She's asking for you, she said. Darren hadn't called. Of course not. But Charlotte had asked for me. The woman she'd mocked for years. I sat outside her room for 15 minutes before the nurse waved me in. She looked smaller, softer, like someone who had once been beautiful but forgot how to wear it. I hovered near the end of her bed. Heart arrhythmia, she muttered. They say it was stress. I didn't reply. Don't worry, she added, I'm not dying yet. I folded my arms. Then why am I here? She turned her head slowly, her voice brittle. Because I wanted to see what you looked like when you weren't trying to be me. The words hit harder than expected. I never tried to be you. Charlotte let out a dry, humorless laugh. Oh, sweetie. We all try to be someone. I tried to be Marcia. You tried to be seen. Marcello tried to be a savior. And Darren. Her voice faltered. Darren just tried not to be alone. I stared at her, heart pounding. What does that mean? She didn't answer right away. Then, he loved you, in his way. My eyes narrowed. You slept with him. She didn't flinch. I did. And I'm sorry. Not because I feel bad, but because it was a lazy betrayal. Boring even. My hands clenched. Do you want my forgiveness? She looked me straight in the eyes. No, I want you to understand something. She motioned to the table beside her bed, where a worn notebook sat half filled with sketches. I recognized the lines instantly. Fabric folds, shoulders, button trails. You're not the only one Marcello sketched, she said. But you're the only one he never finished. What? He never drew your face, not once, always shadows, always from the back. You haunted him. A chill ran down my spine. He said you were the only woman he couldn't define, she continued. That terrified him. I picked up the notebook. Pages fluttered, drawing after drawing, each one unfinished. Each one unmistakably me. And for the first time I didn't feel flattered. I felt trapped. As if I was just another muse after all. Just another symbol someone else tried to capture. I left the hospital and drove without thinking. Ended up outside the gallery where Marcello's newest collection was debuting that evening. I stood across the street staring at the entrance, watching the lights dance behind tall glass. He had named it Woven Ghosts. They said the show was about forgotten women, about the ones who disappear inside marriages, dinners, and family photographs. The ones you only notice when they stop smiling. A reporter walked out holding a program. I crossed the street and asked, "Can I see that?" She handed it to me, recognizing my face, but not knowing from where. And there on the final page was a quote. She didn't need to wear beauty. She just needed someone to see she already had it. At the bottom, MR. I exhaled. It was beautiful, poetic, painful, but I realized something in that moment. I didn't want to be his ghost. I didn't want to be anyone's tragic heroine stitched into the hem of someone else's narrative. That night, I went home and tore through my sewing room. I gathered every piece of fabric that felt like a costume, every scrap tied to someone else's approval, and I started over. Simple lines, strong shapes, nothing sheer, nothing borrowed. Just cloth and will. A woman's body undecorated but undeniable. 3 days later, Charlotte was discharged. She moved back into her penthouse. Marcia started calling again. Darren didn't. And Marcello, he sent me one final message. If you ever want to be part of something again, my door's open. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Because finally, for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be included. I was trying to be free. I thought once I walked away from all of them, Darren, Marcello, Charlotte, that the story would end. It didn't. Turns out, even when you cut the threads, the fabric doesn't unravel neatly. It bunches, knots, resists. Freedom is messier than betrayal. 3 weeks after the gala, I opened a small online storefront. Nothing flashy, just a name I scribbled on a napkin one night while drinking cheap wine and sewing in my attic studio. Hemline. It felt appropriate, a nod to the thing they always mocked. I uploaded 4 designs, all mine. Built for real women with real hips, real arms, real stories, no sheer illusions, no strings. Orders trickled in, and then they surged. Someone posted one of my dresses, the pale coral wrap with the diagonal pleat across the bust, on Instagram, tagging it, "Set silent strength." Within days, the story exploded. Women were writing and sharing how they'd been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. They didn't want to wear dresses that screamed power. They wanted to wear quiet resilience. I thought maybe I'd finally stepped into a life of my own, until Vivian showed up. She was a neighbor, not close, just close enough to wave at when we took out the trash. Pretty, polished, perpetually helpful. When Darren and I were still married, she once brought over a casserole when I had the flu. Said she admired how calm and composed I always seemed. I thought nothing of it, until I spotted her at a local boutique 3 towns over. She was wearing one of my designs. At first I was thrilled, flattered, maybe she bought it. But then she said it with that same sweet-lipped smile I remembered. "It's just so funny how Marcello kept your sketches all these years. I thought he only used your designs for practice." I froze. "What did you say?" She blinked innocently. "Oh, didn't you know he used to show us your stuff back in the early days, called it the Quiet Woman series. Said you didn't even realize he was watching. Kind of sad, really." Her words landed like cuts behind the knees. "You know Marcello?" I asked carefully. Vivian laughed. "Know him, I dated him, off and on. Before Charlotte, during Charlotte, after Charlotte." My stomach turned. And then she leaned in. "You were never the only muse. You were just the only one who believed you were." I went home and tore open the boxes I'd packed away from Marcello's studio. Sketchbooks, swatches, his signature in black ink. And suddenly I saw it. My lines modified. My shapes tweaked. My early designs, subtly used in his Woven Ghosts collection. Nothing overt, nothing direct, but unmistakably mine. I wasn't his muse. I was his foundation. I should have cried, but I didn't. I walked into my sewing room and grabbed the sharpest pair of shears I owned. Then I took out the dress he designed for me, the one from the gala, and I sliced it in half, straight down the spine. Not because I hated it, but because I finally knew what it had done. It wrapped me in a fantasy that never belonged to me. 2 days later, I received an email. Subject: legal notice, trademark dispute. From Monsieur Ricci Atelier, Marcello. He was trying to claim ownership of Hemline. Said the name and style of my brand infringed on his aesthetic legacy. Legacy. As if my life was part of his resume. I didn't panic. Instead, I called a lawyer, the same one Darren had used when he tried to fight over furniture during our divorce. She was sharp, unforgiving, perfect. "You've got receipts?" she asked. "More than that," I said. "I've got the truth." She grinned. "Then let's stitch him up." Vivian came by the house again a week later, unannounced. "I heard about the letter," she said. "I hope you're not taking it personally. Marcello's just protecting his image." I stared at her, really stared. And then it hit me. Vivian didn't come to mock me. She came because she thought I still needed approval. From him, from them, from the people who once pitied me in last season's shoes. So I smiled. I stepped aside, and I handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, an exclusive invite to my first Hemline runway showing. Front row. No Marcello, no Charlotte, no Darren. Just women like me. Like who I used to be. Like who I refused to be again. And on the final page of the program, a quote of my own. They mocked my outfits. Now they imitate my silence. I didn't expect much press. The Hemline debut was scheduled in a reclaimed barn 30 miles outside the city. No paparazzi, no influencers in limousines. Just raw beams, soft spotlights, and a runway built from salvaged wood, every knot and crack left untouched. Authenticity, not polish. But the night of the show, they came. Women in long coats. Women with gray in their hair and grit in their posture. Women holding hands with daughters they'd raised alone, or mothers they'd forgiven. Some carried folded pieces of paper sketches they'd done once, then tucked away for years. Others came in silence, wearing my dresses like armor. Vivian came too, sat in the front row. She wore red. Of course she did. I almost didn't walk out for the final bow, until I saw who was sitting at the very end of the row, standing in the shadows by the emergency exit. Darren. I hadn't seen him since Charlotte's hospital scare. He looked thinner, not in the way that says Jim, in the way that says stress. His eyes met mine for half a second. Then he looked away. The show went on. It wasn't flashy, no flashing lights, no booming music. Just women walking tall, slow, proud in dresses made from the soft defiance of survival. Hemlines that hit at the calf, not the thigh. Seams that curved around stomachs instead of flattening them. Backs that showed strength, not skin. By the time I stepped onto the runway, the room was dead silent. No clapping. Not yet. Then one woman stood. And then another. And another. Until they were all standing. Applauding. Crying. Some of them were barefoot. Because they understood. After the show, I stayed behind. Picked up fallen programs. Folded chairs. Let the silence breathe around me. That's when Darren stepped out from the side door. I almost didn't come, he said. I almost didn't let you stay. He offered a soft shrug, something like a surrender. You made all this out of what we gave you. I nodded. And what you took from me. He looked ashamed. But then, something flickered in his eyes, like hesitation or fear. There's something you should know, he said. I turned slowly. About what? Charlotte, he whispered. About her and me. I know everything. No, he said, voice cracking. You don't. He handed me an envelope, just like the one I'd received weeks ago. Inside court documents. A guardianship request, filed in Charlotte's name, requesting legal control over Marcia. My jaw clenched. She filed it while Marcia was in recovery, Darren said. Claimed she was unstable, said she couldn't manage her estate. Why would she do that, I asked, though I already knew. Because Marcia changed her will, he said. She left most of it to a foundation. Something about supporting older women in transition. Inspired by you. I staggered back a step. Charlotte found out, lost her mind, started threatening lawyers. That's why she ended up in the hospital. I was speechless. She's not your enemy anymore, Darren added. She never was, I whispered. I just kept trying to win a game she was rigging. He looked at me, eyes suddenly clearer than they'd been in years. I miss you, he said. Not what we had, but what we could have had if I'd seen you sooner. I stared at him for a long moment. You saw me, I said. You just didn't like what you saw. Then I turned away. That night I walked the length of the empty runway barefoot. No audience, no applause. Just the sound of my own footsteps against old wood. And I whispered a promise into the dark. I will never shrink again. Not for love, not for legacy, not for anyone. But just when I thought the show was over, just when I thought I had escaped the fabric of their lives, the final surprise arrived. A message. From a woman I'd never met. You don't know me, but Marcello isn't the only one who stole from you. Ask Darren about the account in San Diego. San Diego. I stared at the message, rereading it, as if each pass would change the meaning. As if somehow I could will it into being a mistake. But it wasn't. I knew Darren had secrets, emotional ones, intimate ones. But financial? That was a betrayal with a paper trail, and I was tired of invisible wounds. I didn't call him. Instead, I called the bank. Used my married name, yes, it still lingered on a few forgotten accounts, and waited through the hold music, my heart hammering. I gave them my information, my social, my old address. And then, yes, Ms. Archer, the woman said politely. We have a trust account under Darren Archer. Do you have the secondary access code to confirm? Secondary. Meaning someone else had primary. My voice trembled. Who's listed as the account initiator? A pause, fingers clacking on keys. A Miss Vivian Hale. Vivian. My neighbor, my friend, my dress-wearing, casserole-making, red-wearing neighbor. Marcello wasn't the only one playing the long game. I hung up before the woman could say more. Then I sat in the middle of my studio, surrounded by fabric I no longer trusted. I thought I'd been naive with Charlotte. But Vivian, she had disarmed me. With smiles, with support, with whispered compliments about my work and fake humility about her own. And while I rebuilt my life, she was siphoning from its foundations. I didn't confront Darren right away. I went to Vivian. I knocked. She opened the door, wearing one of my designs, the asymmetrical navy midi. The one I designed after my first night at Marcello's studio. And she smiled. The audacity. Oh, she chirped. I was hoping you'd stop by. Your show was... I held up a printout of the trust account. The color drained from her face. You made me dinner, I said slowly. You asked me about my work. You came to my show. She opened her mouth, searching for a lie. It's not what you think. No, I hissed. Then tell me what it is. Tell me why my ex-husband opened an account in your name while we were still married. Tell me what part of our friendship was real. She was silent. So I said it for her. None of it. Later that night, I finally called Darren. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just asked one question. Why, Vivian? His sigh crackled over the phone like static. She was... easy? She believed me. She laughed at my jokes. She didn't ask for anything. I closed my eyes. You mean she didn't expect to be respected? I didn't think you'd ever find out. You didn't think I'd ever matter enough to check. Silence. Is that trust account where the missing funds went? From our joint business loan? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The next day, I filed a civil complaint. My lawyer moved quickly, she always did. The court date was set. Vivian went quiet on social media. Darren issued a vague apology through a friend. One of those sad I've made mistakes public statements that meant nothing and changed even less. But this time, I didn't shrink. I went on my platform, my modest but growing following of women who had bought my designs not for status but for survival, and I told the truth. Not in rage, in detail. I supported a marriage that hollowed me out, I wrote. I dressed for forgiveness. I sewed for love. I smiled for peace. And they stole from me anyway. The post went viral. Messages flooded in. Women from all over telling me about secret accounts, fake friendships, quiet manipulations they'd never spoken aloud. And I realized the hemline wasn't just mine anymore. It was a movement. A stitch in every woman who had been laughed at and kept walking. The next week an envelope arrived. Unmarked. Inside a check. $250,000. And a note. I'm sorry, I never saw you for who you were, but the world does now. Don't stop, M. Marcello. I held the check for a long time. Then I folded it in half, and I sent it back, because I didn't need to be paid for what they took. I needed to keep what I'd built without them. But just as I started planning the next Hemline show, one I swore would be entirely mine, I received a call from the lawyer, and her voice didn't carry confidence this time. It's Marcia, she said. She passed away last night. I felt the floor tilt. She left a letter for you, and a new will. What does it say? I whispered. The lawyer paused. It names you as executor of the family estate. I never expected to outlive Marcia. She was the kind of woman who clung to life with polished fingernails and steel-heeled spite, who hosted tea parties like war councils and cut people from her guest list the way surgeons remove tumors cleanly without remorse. And yet, she left it all to me. Not just the house, not just the jewelry, not just the frozen family trust. The entire estate, and with it, the ghosts that lived inside it. The letter arrived in a thick white envelope sealed in wax, the kind of old-world drama Marcia adored. I opened it alone, sitting at the same wooden desk where she once scolded me for wearing flats to a family photo shoot. Inside, to the only woman in this family who dared to build something from nothing. You were never my daughter, but you were never theirs either, and somehow that made you stronger. This isn't a gift, it's a dare. Fix what we broke. I read it 3 times. It didn't feel like kindness. It felt like guilt dressed in pearls. The next morning, I met with the estate attorney. She laid it out in clean clinical terms. Charlotte receives nothing. Darren receives a conditional inheritance pending a full forensic audit. Vivian is not named anywhere. And you're responsible for dispersing what's left. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was poetic. The woman they mocked for her outfits, her silence, her unimportance, now held the keys to their legacy. But legacy, as it turns out, is not made of silk or gold. It's made of responsibility and bitterness. I didn't reach out to Charlotte. She reached out to me. A handwritten note, delivered by courier. Not an apology, not even a question. Just one line. Do it with dignity, or not at all. I folded the paper in half and burned it in my kitchen sink. Because if Charlotte wanted dignity, she should have started with herself. That week, I visited the estate. The mansion sat like a monument to everything they pretended to be wealth reputation class. But the corners of it had begun to rot. The floorboards creaked. The wallpaper bubbled. It wasn't a home. It was a costume. And I was ready to undress it. I moved fast. Sold off 3 of the 5 vehicles. Liquidated the art Darren never understood but bragged about at parties. Shut down the offshore account tied to the Hale Trust, yes, the same one Vivian accidentally benefited from. And then with my lawyer at my side, I held a press conference. Not flashy, just honest. I announced the creation of the Hemline Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at supporting women over 40 who had been financially exploited by partners, families, or systems. Marcia's money would build halfway houses, sponsor business grants, fund healing retreats. It wouldn't buy forgiveness, but it could create freedom. And then I made the final call. To Darren. He answered on the 3rd ring. You don't have to do this, he said before I even spoke. You're right, I replied. I want to. A pause. What's your price? My silence, I said, for now. He laughed bitterly. That's cold. No, I said. It's boundaried. There's a difference. I almost didn't go to the estate hearing, but something in me needed to see their faces. Charlotte arrived in head-to-toe black like she was mourning more than her mother. Maybe she was mourning her last ounce of control. Vivian didn't come. Darren sat in the back next to his lawyer. He looked older, smaller. I took my seat at the front. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one looking up. I was the one they had to look at. After the session, Charlotte approached me in the hallway. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said, tone icy. I turned slowly. "You mean the peace? The clarity? The fact that no one in this family owns me anymore?" I smiled. "I plan to." Back at home, I sat in my sewing room holding a photo I found in one of Marcia's drawers. It was me, years ago, standing in the background of a garden party, holding a tray, wearing the first dress I ever made, unseen, unremarkable, but alive. I pinned it to the wall, not as a reminder of where I came from, but as proof that even shadows cast light. Then my phone buzzed. A new message, blocked number. "You stitched your way to the top, but don't forget who taught you to sew. M. Marcello." Again. And beneath it, a photo of a new dress design. Mine, but not made by my hands. Someone was copying Hemline. Again. There it was, the photo Marcello sent. A model on a Parisian runway wearing a dress with the same diagonal pleat I'd spent months perfecting. Same exposed shoulder, same crescent-shaped hemline. Same story told by someone else, but it wasn't Marcello's line. It was Vivian's. She had launched a label, Needle and Veil. And she wasn't just stealing my designs. She was stealing my voice. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. All I could think about was the day she first came to my door with a congratulatory casserole, wearing a crooked smile and pretending she admired me. She wasn't admiring. She was studying, and now she was profiting. Her website was sleek. Her bio carefully written to mimic my own story, a woman reborn through fabric devoted to empowering others. She'd used my words, almost line for line. Even the marketing campaign was familiar: older models, slow runway walks, quotes about resilience. Except this time my name was nowhere. I called my attorney again. This time I didn't wait for small talk. "I want a file." "Copyright?" she asked. "Design theft, identity theft, defamation. You name it, I want it on the table." She exhaled. "You've got a case, but it'll get ugly. I've lived in ugly, I've dined with it, I've sewn for it, let's go." 2 days later, Vivian posted a video. Hair pulled back, voice soft. "I've been attacked by someone I once considered a friend." She called my claims jealousy, called me unhinged, called my success a one-hit wonder. And then, with a polished sigh, she said, if she truly believed in women's empowerment, she wouldn't try to tear another woman down. Gaslight wrapped in feminism. Classic. I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because the comments started pouring in. Not just from followers, but from customers. From women. "This is Hemline's dress. Vivian's line is a lie. I own the original, and I know who made it. Nice try, copycat." She tried to steal empowerment and failed. Vivian underestimated something critical. She didn't just steal a silhouette. She stole a testimony. And women who've been silenced, they don't forget the sound of their own voices. Meanwhile, Marcello reached out again. This time a voicemail. "You're not wrong. She studied your work, but I never gave her access. I swear to you I didn't." I deleted the message. He didn't get to absolve himself in whispers after igniting the fire. Then something happened that changed everything. A box arrived at my door. Inside, a garment bag. No label, no card. I unzipped it slowly. Inside was my first dress. The original, navy, hand-stitched. The one I wore to that first charity gala, the one Marcello noticed. And pinned to the lining was a note. In Charlotte's handwriting. "You don't need a runway. You never did. I kept this. I don't know why. Maybe because I saw you too, and I hated you for it. Burn it, or wear it. Either way, it was always yours." I sat down on the floor and cried. Not because Charlotte had shown remorse, but because in her twisted, broken way, she had admitted I was real, and nothing, not Darren's lies, not Marcello's manipulation, not Vivian's theft could take that from me anymore. 2 weeks later, I launched my own video. No makeup, no studio lights. Just me at my sewing table. I started Hemline because I was tired of being overlooked. I never imagined I'd be plagiarized by someone who once called herself a friend. But this story isn't about her. It's about you, the women who bought my designs, because you saw yourselves in them. I held up the original navy dress. I made this alone. No applause, no funding, no man behind me. And I'll keep making what they can't steal, because what I sew now isn't just cloth. The video went viral. Over 3 million views in 48 hours. Vivian deleted her page. Her line folded a week later. And in the mail, a letter from the US Copyright Office. All 5 of my original Hemline designs officially registered. But the final twist wasn't legal. It was personal. Because one morning, as I packed orders from my attic studio, a small package arrived. Inside a single key. No note, just an address scribbled on the label. It was Marcia's estate, but not the house. The basement. I hadn't known it was locked. And inside was a box, labeled with my name. And inside that, letters, photos, financial records, all leading to one unbelievable truth. I wasn't just the girl who married into their family. I was blood. I sat on the cold cement floor of Marcia's basement holding the box like it contained dynamite. In a way, it did. Because inside were pieces of my life I had never known I was missing. The first item was a photograph. A black and white image of a young woman seated on the edge of a bed in a silk robe. Her face half in shadow, but unmistakably familiar. Her nose, my chin, my mother's eyes. Except it wasn't my mother. On the back, written in Marcia's sweeping cursive, Estelle, 1968, my sister, your mother. I dropped the photo. No, that couldn't be. My mother had died when I was 7 or so, I'd always been told. My father never spoke of her. My foster relatives brushed her off as a mistake who left too soon. But now, Marcia was telling me something different. That the woman I thought was my aunt was actually my mother. That Marcia wasn't just my tormentor, she was my aunt. And that meant Darren. Darren was my cousin. I couldn't breathe. Everything blurred. Every insult at the dinner table. Every backhanded compliment. Every cold stare across family gatherings. Was that guilt? Was it jealousy? Or was it shame? Had they all known? Had he known? Had I slept beside a man who shared my blood? I dug deeper into the box. Documents, birth certificates, a sealed court file from 1985. It took me 3 hours, a legal pad, and a bottle of wine to piece it together. Estelle, my mother, had gotten pregnant young, too young, with a man Marcia hated, a man who disappeared. She gave birth to me in secret, and Marcia, she took me. Not out of kindness, but to keep the family name clean. She registered me under a different last name, moved me to another city, let me believe I was nothing to them. And then years later, almost cruelly, I married into the very family I belonged to. No one stopped it. No one said a word. I wanted to vomit. Not just from the horror, but from the silence. The orchestrated silence. How many people knew? Charlotte. Probably. Darren. Maybe. But Marcia. Marcia had designed this. I stumbled out of the basement and into the sharp sunlight. I called my lawyer first. I need to see if a sealed record from 1985 can be reopened. She didn't ask why. Then I called Darren. He picked up groggy. Did you know? I asked. He was quiet. Too quiet. Did you know? Not at first, he whispered. My knees buckled. You married me. I didn't know then, I swear. It was a coincidence. I only found out after we applied for that mortgage when they flagged the paperwork. You still stayed. I loved you. I hung up. Because there are some sentences no amount of love should survive. The next day I shut down Hemline orders. Not forever. Just long enough to think, to breathe. To mourn a version of myself I never really knew, the girl who grew up feeling like a stray, only to realize she'd been someone's buried shame all along. But something inside me fought to the surface. Not rage. Not even revenge. Clarity. The bloodline didn't taint me. It explained me. It explained why Marcia hated me, not because I was unworthy, but because I reminded her of everything she wanted erased. It explained why Charlotte could never stand my presence, because even at my quietest I carried a truth they spent decades denying. It explained why Darren stayed silent. He wasn't just spineless. He was complicit. I took the photo of Estelle and framed it. Hung it above my sewing table. Not because I forgave her. I couldn't. Not yet. But because I came from her. And that mattered. Then I sat down with fabric. Not new. The navy dress. The first, the original, the one Charlotte tried to ruin, the one Marcello praised, the one I wore before I knew who I really was. I cut it apart piece by piece. Not to destroy it, but to remake it. This time not to impress, not to belong, to be whole. And on the lining of the final seam I embroidered a new label. Estelle. But just as the thread tightened, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A woman's voice, soft, hesitant. I saw your post about Estelle. I think I'm your sister. Her name was Ivy. And the moment I heard it, something inside me exhaled. Something I didn't even know I'd been holding my whole life. We agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between our cities. Neutral ground. No cameras, no lawyers, no family name looming over us. Just two women with the same blood and wildly different stories. She was younger than me by 6 years. Wore a wool coat 2 sizes too big and carried a messenger bag filled with crumpled paper and highlighters. A teacher, she told me. Middle school English? divorced, no children. When she smiled, I saw Estelle in her eyes, that haunted softness, that defiant flicker beneath it. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside letters, written by our mother, to the girls I couldn't keep, to the daughters they never let me raise. I gripped the pages as if they might dissolve. Estelle had written every year on our birthdays, not knowing where to send the words. She wrote of guilt, of running, of the deal she made with Marcia, a deal that involved silence, distance, and self-erasure. I was told they'd give you a better life if I disappeared. I agreed. But I never stopped seeing your faces in my dreams. If you find each other, find me too. But Estelle had died 2 years ago, alone, in a small apartment, under an alias. Only Ivy had found her, and through a single journal entry she found me. We cried in that cafe like no one was watching. Two strangers born of the same fracture, trying to knit their stories together in broad daylight. Ivy held my hand and whispered, "You survived more than most, but I think you're still sewing your armor." And she was right. Because even after all I had endured Darren's betrayal, Charlotte's cruelty, Marcello's manipulation, Vivian's theft, Marcia's control, I still hadn't let anyone in. Not fully. I'd rebuilt my life in steel and silk, but I hadn't rebuilt my heart. Until now. We spent hours together. She asked about Hemline. I asked about her students. We shared stories about foster homes and holidays we never celebrated. And then she said something that will live with me forever. Maybe we were born into the wrong pattern, but it doesn't mean we can't cut our own. That night, back in my studio, I pinned Ivy's photo next to Estelle's. And below them I added something new. A fabric swatch soft cotton, the kind used for childhood dresses. A promise. That I wouldn't let our story end in loss. The next week, I announced the new Hemline line. Legacy. 12 dresses, each inspired by women who raised themselves, with names like Ivy, Estelle, Clara, June. The campaign launched with no celebrities, just women, some over 60, some single mothers, some survivors, some fighters, but all of them seen. On opening night, I wore a dress made from 3 pieces. The navy fabric from my first design, a lace trim from Estelle's wedding dress Ivy found in storage, a lining stitched with letters written in Estelle's own handwriting, digitized, embroidered. When I stepped onto the runway for the final bow, I wasn't alone. Ivy walked beside me. Our arms linked, our pain transformed. The applause didn't matter. The lights didn't matter. What mattered was this. I wasn't the woman they tried to make invisible anymore. I was the woman who uncovered everything they buried. And in the audience quietly seated in the second row, I saw her. Charlotte. No smirk. Just tears. She didn't wave. She didn't try to approach me. But she mouthed something across the crowd. 2 simple words. I'm sorry. For the first time, I believed her. But just when I thought this story had found its final thread, a message arrived. From a New York publishing house. Subject your story. A memoir. Let's talk. I stared at the email for a full minute before breathing. A memoir. The idea of turning my life, the mess, the betrayals, the blood-soaked seams into a story for public consumption made my stomach twist. They wanted a title, a proposal, a signature. They wanted to celebrate resilience. They wanted to make money. And they wanted me to give them permission. But the question wasn't whether I could tell the story. The question was, should I called Ivy. She picked up immediately, no small talk, just breathless curiosity. You got the email? Yes. She was silent for a beat. Then if you write it, make sure it's yours, not theirs. I smiled. They want a memoir. They'll want the trauma, not the truth, she said. And she was right. They'd want the gala, the affairs, the betrayal, the heartbreak. But would they want the sewing, the crying in empty rooms, the quiet strength of walking away without burning everything? Would they want the real woman or just the scandal? The publishing house offered a 7-figure advance. They dangled names, television rights, national tours. But then came the email I'd been waiting for, from Charlotte. I know you're writing it. Please, don't drag my mother through the mud. I read it 3 times. And then I replied, I'm not dragging anyone, but I'm not protecting the myth either. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. Later that night, I pulled out every journal I'd kept over the last 10 years. There were dozens. Some filled with sketches, some with inventory numbers, some with nothing but rage scribbled across the pages. And on the last page of one torn notebook dated 4 years ago, I found a line I had forgotten I wrote. They mocked my outfits, but one day they'll wear my name. The next morning, I sat down and began drafting the memoir outline. But not for them. For me, for the woman I used to be. The one who wore secondhand dresses and swallowed her tongue at family dinners. For the woman who stitched her life back together in an attic no one visited. For the girl who never got to say goodbye to her real mother. For the sister who found me after everyone else tried to erase me. The chapters came naturally. Threadbare beginnings. Hemmed in. Pinned and pressed. The seam ripped. Fitted for silence. The unfinished sketch. Bloodline bias. A pattern all my own. And finally, the final stitch. When I turned in the outline, my agent called me. This is different, she said. Different how it's not just scandal, it's not just betrayal, it's healing. I let out a breath. Good, I said. That's the part they never want. But it's the part that lasts. Word got out quickly. An interview request came from Vogue, another from the New York Times. They wanted to know how I'd gone from housewife in the background to the voice of a quiet revolution. I agreed to one, and in that interview I said this. I wasn't invisible. I was ignored. There's a difference. They mocked my clothes, my voice, my stillness because it didn't scream. But I wasn't built to scream. I was built to endure. That night I received one last unexpected message. From Marcello. Saw the headline. You're braver than I ever was. There's a dress I never finished. Yours. It's still here. I think it always will be. If you ever want to come see it or burn it, I'll open the door. I didn't reply. Some stories need closure. Others need silence. The memoir was set to release in 6 months. In Ivy, she asked if she could write the foreword. I cried. Because suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who'd been hurt. I was the woman who healed. Out loud, in public, without shame. And as the press tour began, as cameras started pointing at the girl who once sewed in silence, I wore one dress. Simple, clean, navy. The very first design. But with one difference stitched into the tag. They mocked me. Now I dress the world. The morning light poured through the window like a benediction. I sat at my sewing table, hands resting on the fabric that had carried me through every twist and turn of this journey, the same navy cloth from my very first dress. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was a symbol. The book was out. The reviews were in. Some called it raw and courageous, others too revealing, and a few even transformative. But the words that mattered came from strangers women who wrote to say, "Your story gave me permission to be seen. You made me believe I can rewrite my own hemline. Thank you for showing us how to sew ourselves whole." I took a deep breath and walked outside. The house was quiet, my sanctuary, but also a testament to all I had survived. No more whispered insults from Marcia. No more Charlotte's smirks. No more Darren's silences. Just peace. As I watered the garden, I thought about all the stitches I'd made. Each one a choice. To forgive, to fight, to rise, to reclaim. And then in the mailbox, a small package. Inside the dress Marcello never finished. Folded neatly, untouched. I held it close, then placed it on the mannequin by the window. Because some things aren't about possession, they're about letting go. That night I sat down with Ivy and the women who had become my chosen family. We laughed, we cried, we dreamed. Of dresses that tell stories. Of women who wear their scars like crowns. I whispered into the quiet room. This is my last stitch on their fabric. From now on, I'm weaving my own. And so I did. Not just with thread, but with every part of my life. No longer the girl mocked for her outfits. No longer the shadow in their stories, but the woman who wrote the final chapter. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is own her story, stitch by stitch, and wear it like a queen.